I'd now like to introduce Roger Smith. Roger is the chair of the Australian Feral Camel Management Project Steering Committee. He's the cool head at the tiller, keeping everybody basically focused on what needs to be done. So Roger's going to be talking about forming a successful and enduring AFCMP collaboration.
Thanks, Steve. I think "was the chair" was the operative word. For those of you who've had to listen to me for 14 meetings over the last 4 years, I'm sorry you're going to have to do it again, but I promise this will be the last time. Jan mentioned the scale and the complexity of the project. What I would like to add is that if it hadn't have been for the commitment of the number of people who've been involved, the large number of people who've been involved, the project wouldn't have been as successful as it has been. So, why collaborate? Well, obviously we're dealing with a highly mobile feral animal that doesn't respect fences and certainly doesn't acknowledge land tenures or jurisdictions. We had a number of different perspectives about the way to manage feral camels, and we had a number of robust discussions in the early stages of the committee over whether or not commercial use was in, whether or not commercial use was part of an integrated feral camel management program, what actions we could take to support and develop commercial use in some areas where there was no option for commercial use, we had to forego that. There were robust discussions on the use of ground control and whether ground control was part of the project. And there was also early discussion as to whether we were talking about a single aerial culling operation or whether we should use the jurisdictional structures to deal with it. We also needed to account for broader community perspectives and obviously the humaneness of killing and trapping methods. And very obviously also there was a major perspective amongst the community, an antagonism to shooting to waste. So all of those led to a need for adequate collaboration, and in addition to which we didn't have a legislative base on which to access land. So we had to get landholder consent, and Jan's already mentioned that that consent was achieved over a range of landholders over some 1.3 million square kilometres. So there needed to be good collaborative and good consultative processes to achieve all of those. We did have strong motivation from landholders. We had strong motivation across all landholders that something needed to be done, and we also had recognition that it needed to be done on a regional scale, so you needed to ensure that your neighbour was taking the same action as you, and on a jurisdictional scale. We needed effective collaborations to allow those discussions to take place and to oversee the rollout of those management approaches. So the project itself initially had 20 project partners. I won't read through the list. Not all of those partners were directly represented on the steering committee. All of them had a voice, but not all of them were directly represented. But what we did discover was that we needed to expand the steering committee to include a number of other groups who weren't already project partners. The structure of the project, Ninti One was obviously the project manager, liaised directly with the Australian government. The Australian government, as a primary funding source, was represented on the steering committee and also on the monitoring and evaluation group. The steering committee largely dealt with strategic and policy issues and got collaboration, and operations were carried out by a national operations group chaired by Quentin. That operation group then broke down into jurisdictional operation groups, and what that chart doesn't show is that there was actually very good cross-border collaboration between the 3 states. And I see Queensland has been left off it, but Queensland was involved as well. So the governance structure needed to be comprehensive. It was inclusive. It needed to allow involvement of all landholder interests and broader stakeholders. It needed to provide consultation between jurisdictions, and it needed to ensure a good relationship between policy, operational, and the monitoring components of the project. This next slide always reminds me of these are our friendly staff, and they're here to help you. The top group was the MERI group. Over to the left, was the aerial culling team workshop, and down in the bottom corner was a Spinifex planning meeting, which was effectively looking at training Indigenous people in ground controlling techniques. So what were the features of good collaboration? For the National Operations Group, these are the features that Quentin has advised me of. You needed simple, outcome-oriented goals. You needed to consistently review your team and project goals. Discussions as to how those goals tied into the overall goals of the project. Clarification of roles. Stating of responsibilities. Identifying accountability for those responsibilities. Going into the conflict zone respectfully. Being honest about mistakes. And creating systems for sharing information. At the steering committee level, and we believe that we achieved these features, we also needed clear goals. What were our feral camel density targets? What was the capacity for building future management? We reviewed performance against those goals on an annual basis and also on a quarterly basis at each meeting. We had agreed investment guidelines and annual work plans. We maintained consistent messages. We respected the legitimacy of everyone's views. We operated at a strategic level, focusing on outcomes. When the arguments occurred, we drove them up to a higher level to find those outcomes and to find common ground from which we could build consensus. And for more complex issues, we used smaller working groups out of session to build those consensus positions. So the steering committee itself, most of our project partners, but not all, had direct representation on the steering committee. The collaboration at the steering committee included 5 governments, 6 Aboriginal organisations, the Rangelands Alliance, the RSPCA, Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association, the Australian Camel Industry Association, 2 abattoirs, and Ninti One, who were the project managers. We held between 3 to 5 meetings a year. Some of those were teleconferences. And we had good interaction between the steering committee and the operational groups. Because of the size of the steering committee and because of the diversity of the issues that we were dealing with, we maintained a standing agenda, and that standing agenda also ensured continuity of our discussions. So we opened each meeting with partner and stakeholder reports. We went on to strategic issues, and our standing strategic issues were seasonal conditions and implications, cross-border collaboration, project governance, annual planning and reporting, risk management, and I can't stress too strongly how valuable risk management and having a risk management strategy is to a project of this scale and complexity, and having between 16 to 20 minds turn to that risk management strategy every quarter to work through it. And obviously communication strategy. Because we had multiple representation, because we had a large number of organisations involved, and in order to ensure the continuity, we had multiple representations from most organisations, and they made sure that we had continuity of commitment from organisations. And I think it's an indication of the success of the project that I don't know what the final statistics are going to be, but the number of hours that were flown in helicopters, the number of rounds of ammunition that must have been used, the number of people involved with firearms, the number of animals that were put down and that were humanely trucked off, and we had no incidents reported. So I think that's a major plus for this project. So the future. Well, there's been many formal and informal collaborations established, and I think you've already heard about where some of them are coming yesterday. We've already got some feral horse programs underway, and we hope this feral camel management program collaborations can be expanded, because I believe that we need to consolidate the supply chains for the commercial industry, which is going to have a significant ongoing role in removing and containing the numbers of feral camels. So thank you very much.